I have the pleasure of being here this evening to talk to you about our company, which is the Peninsula Hotel, Peninsula Paris, more specifically, which is part of a company called Hong Kong and Shanghai Hotels. Hong Kong Shanghai Hotels, briefly, is a company that is represented by one family called the Kadoorie family. Sir Michael Kadoorie, our chairman, were with us in the room this evening. He would explain to you that Paris is not for him, it's for his children. And it's a refreshing look to have an investor that is looking into long-term and looking into generational investment from one generation to another in an environment that is represented by a lot of deals that are made overnight, of swaps, of hotels that are traded, that are sold, hotels that could be viewed as a form of commodity. Here we're dealing with a company that is looking into the long term. The company is one of the oldest hospitality companies in Asia. It's another important characteristic that we're quite proud of. We're a small company, 9 hotels, 10 with Paris. Hong Kong and Shanghai Hotels as a group represents various entities. Most of us are familiar or have heard the name Peninsula, but in reality we have various groups that range from hotels to clubs and consultancies and services. Few people know that we operate the food and beverage component part of several clubs in Hong Kong, that we operate the first class and business lounge of Cathay Pacific in Hong Kong, just to name a few. We operate a few golf courses in Asia and the United States and some office building. All of this is extremely profitable. Your professor of finance is here, so I had to give a few numbers for those who care to remember about it. This is just from our annual report. The number that I think is quite striking for such a small company that we are is that we have over 7,600 employees in the company. And Paris had an impact on that because we added 550 people onto the balance sheet. In terms of hotels, I thought it would be interesting to list here the various properties that we have, and the most striking feature in terms of the setup of the company, which is to show you the percentile interest that we have in each property. And this is where the model of the company is truly unique in the sense that we are still one of those companies that like to own where they operate. We don't do any management contracts, we don't do franchising, because we like to control. And with the exception of 2 properties, and those of you who are fast readers notice that there are 2 properties where we do not have the majority ownership, which is the Peninsula Beverly Hills and the Peninsula Paris, where we have a minority stake of 20%. We try to offer the best of East and West. Easy to say, difficult to put in place. We are a company, we do not have a love or passion for documentation. We have very limited standards. It's a question that I often get is well, how, if you don't have standards, how do you bring the Peninsula DNA? How do you instill this brand when you move from one location to another? And the reality is it's all based on people. A company of 10 hotels, we have our own research and technology department in Hong Kong. We develop our own applications. It's a buzzword nowadays to say that we have automations in our hotels, or domotique as we would say in French. But the reality is that very few companies develop their own applications. It's often something that you purchase off the shelf, and the whole challenge is to try to bring different technologies with various standards and different languages to work together, to connect them together. Now, the flagship, the Peninsula Hong Kong, and this is where truly the DNA of the company is based, because this is where it all began. The flagship celebrated its 85th year anniversary recently. It's the original hotel that you see there, and then 20 years ago a glass tower was laid on top of it. We talk about exceptional locations. In the case of Paris, we spent 15 years looking for the ideal location, and the ideal location for Sir Michael was a building that had a minimum of 200 rooms, that had a historical significance, and that was a location, grade A location. Now, when you put those 3 simple factors together, you don't find properties like that every day, and that's why it took so long for us to find the ideal property. Same thing in London, where we spent 15, 20 years actually trying to identify the right location. Hotels which are small enough to give personalized service. The average size of our hotels are around 200 rooms. Some properties are larger in Asia, but that's the average size that we have. Unique character and totally part of their local culture. And the part of the local culture is something that is very important. For those of you who have been able to see the Peninsula Paris, we are not necessarily an Asian hotel. Yes, we have 2 lions that greet you at one of the entrances, but apart from that, there are very, very few signs of our Asian heritage within the property. We always have a spa in every single one of our properties. We always have a swimming pool. And that is because it's part of our belief. A few icons that are emblematic of Peninsula hotels. One of them that makes me smile every single time because it's 100% based on the personality of our chairman. Aviation. And that's why in most of our properties you will see a link with aviation, a link with local aviation. So in Hong Kong, it's called the China Clipper, and it retraces the story of the first flights, the Catalina aircrafts that left from California to go to Hong Kong. In Bangkok, it's Pari Batra, first general of the Thai Air Force, and it retraces the history of Thai Air Force. In Paris, he would have loved to have had a heli surface, a helipad, but after meeting with local administration, he was told that in his wildest dreams this would not happen. And therefore we have a restaurant that is based on the theme of l'oiseau blanc. And other features such as automobile. I mentioned to you earlier the Rolls-Royces in some of our properties. There's no financial reason for having that. In Paris, he lent us a 1934 Phantom Rolls-Royce. The car is worth approximately 800,000 euros. That took a 4.5-year renovation, as long as you renovate le 19 Avenue Kléber. And I share this with you because, once again, it's the passion, which is truly one of our key features in terms of what we try to do. Aviation, automobiles, page boy, page lady, emblematic of who we are, has come to represent us. What we've done to try to bring this seamless interface to our guests, which is intuitive, which is easy to use, and which is applicable throughout the room. Every single light fixture in the room is an LED panel, which is part of our system, which is made only for us. All of our telephones are made only for us. Why? Because we have certain applications that we link with our telephones. Other elements that are truly unique in terms of who we are. We talked about automation. We are one of the few companies that offer telephone communications 24/7 throughout the world, complimentary. Video on demand. We develop our own system, so in Paris we can offer this complimentary, and all of this adds to the notion of value to our guests. Now, we're very proud of this because first of all, it's something that we did ourselves, but secondly, because of the thought that was put into this process. We can justify to you every single label and position on that tablet and explain to you why it's there. I get up in the middle of the night, I'm a man of a certain age, I need to go to the restroom. Will I have the light that will show to the restroom? When I put my hand over the phone, will it light up? So I intuitively, when I wake up, I don't know where I am. Will I understand where I am, where I operate, and what's the local time? All of these are very, very personal. We don't claim that they're perfect. We claim that they're very personal. And perfection in our area, in our field, doesn't exist, but the pursuit is certainly what we try to do. A little recap of where we are, and history obviously has a lot to do about our location. Remember Hong Kong, Shanghai hotels, 2 cities, that's where it all started. And then you see that we veered off to the United States, operating 3 properties in New York, in Chicago, in Beverly Hills. And then 2014, finally we came in the other direction, and were able to come and open our first property in Paris, in Europe. And as a good news never comes along, after finding Paris within the same year, just so happens, it's the irony of timing, we found the perfect location for a next project, which will be London. So in terms of projects, which for us, sharing 2 projects with you seems like nothing, but for us it's the world. 2 projects which are London, wonderful building, wonderful location, which is on Grosvenor Square. The building itself is a nondescript 1970 building. This will be a tear down, meaning we will tear down the building. Rebuild, it will be mixed use, which is partially part of our product. If you look at the properties that we operate in Asia, we liked mixed use in terms of risk and in terms of revenue. This is where we can spread our assets and we can focus on hospitality, but also on real estate, but also on retail. If you think at the downturns, the up and down of the economy, once you have some leases that are signed for 2 to 3 years, it's very good to get a steady stream of revenue. Peninsula Rangoon, in a wonderful building, which used to be the center of the Burmese railway. It will be a small property. This is where it's for us. We're deviating slightly from our model, proposing a building that will have 60 to 80 rooms, developed with a local partner, of course, because you need all the assistance you can to establish yourself in Rangoon, and will probably open, due to its size, before London. So those are the two projects that are in the pipeline for us. Notre pièce de résistance, Paris, reason why we are here today to present to you. Meaning that rebirth of a heritage building. This is a 1908 building that was designed as a hotel, was a hotel called the Hôtel Majestic, operated as such for 30 years before being sold, acquired by the French government, operated as a center for international conferences, which was part of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then our government, needing funds in 2007, was put for sale. And that's where the joint ownership, that is Qatar Hospitality and Hong Kong Shanghai Hotels, was able to acquire the building and work on the rebirth, on remaking this building once again a grand hotel. Ce site a une âme, a une histoire. L'immeuble a été construit comme un hôtel. The back of house is truly extensive. And in terms of projects, I've seen a few projects, but usually, let's be honest amongst ourselves, usually the back of house is the last part that owners look into because it's not the one that's producing. Here you have 3 levels of underground that were created. We have a total of 31,000 square feet, and we have substantial area under the property, which is all for our team. At the opening, so in those days, correct me if I'm wrong, Isabelle, we were 430. We were so, this is a very good problem to have, overwhelmed by the response from guests and busy, that we recruited 100 additional positions within a month and a half that followed, because we were truly swamped. So now we are at, we're 550. I joined the company rather in 2009 as resident manager at the Peninsula Hong Kong. Let me tell you, at that point in time I was working for Mandarin in Miami, and I got a call from a headhunter saying the Peninsula Bangkok is looking for a position. And I'd heard of Peninsula. I'd seen the Peninsula, I even applied many years ago at the Peninsula in Beverly Hills. And at the risk of disappointing you or shocking you, I had no special appeal for Bangkok. And I applied thinking this is a headhunter, I can give my resume, we'll see what comes out of it. I got a call a few weeks later saying that the COO, my boss, Peter Boer, had looked at my resume and wanted to know if I would be interested in Peninsula Hong Kong, which I didn't even know was looking for a position. I was fortunate enough to be selected. Worked in Hong Kong for 1 year. After 1 year, that passed very, very, very fast. The opportunity came for Bangkok. So you see, it was destiny. I was meant to go to Bangkok. And contrarily to what I thought, I had the most amazing time. And after 3 years, like every true expat that leaves Thailand, I was crying because I didn't want to leave. And I left for the opportunity of Paris. In terms of schooling, I decided late that I liked hospitality. To the chagrin of my parents, I enjoyed very much going to college, too much. And after 3 degrees, I thought this is ridiculous. My parents will not sustain me any longer. I'd better do something about my life. And got a job in a small property that very few of you have ever heard of, but that's why I took pride in listing it, called the Hôtel de la Ponche. Hôtel de la Ponche, 18 rooms in my hometown in Saint-Tropez. When I heard of this project, absolutely, just like Hong Kong, I could only rise and say, you bet, yes. And once again, I was fortunate to get the position. But when I reminisce about these large properties, well-known small properties, all of these contributed and made me whatever I am today, and sustained the passion that I felt and I feel for our industry. If I can only encourage you to work on your resume and make sure that your resume reflects your thought in where you want to go. Time that I'd worked with small properties, large properties, groups, but they were always city hotels, and I lacked the resort experience. And it's something, and Isabelle has often heard me talk about resorts because the experience that you have with the guest in a resort environment is truly unique and quite different than what we do in city hotels. That after 8 years of Four Seasons, it was time to go and learn somewhere else. I missed the warmth and environment of the Caribbean, and I thought, well, what is closer to the Caribbean? What a better location than Miami, at the footstep of the Caribbean and Latin America. And then worked with a Mandarin property. That's it. Then I joined Peninsula. I kept referring to the fact that we want to be a local property. So if we want to be a local property, you could say, well, okay, so you're one of the others. What are you bringing? Sure, new technology, a new building, but tomorrow somebody opens a new building, so you're the same. And that's where I think that we try to bring this careful blend of Asian sensitivity and try to share some emotions with the guest. And that's where I think nothing novel in what I just said to you. Very easy to say, very difficult to put in place. And that's where I say that there's a blend of Asian sensitivity with a mix of European expertise. And that's what we try to bring, a soft touch of Asian sensitivity, a desire to do well. So I've interviewed, I'm not going to say 100%, but I've interviewed 97% of every single staff member in our property. And I always finish the interview by saying, I wish for you to have fun. And that's truly what I wish for every single person that joins this industry. I often refer to our village. 500 people to me is a little village. And the interactions that you have within that village, the camaraderie, the sense of appartenance, of being, I'm part, I'm one of them, that blew me away. Some educated people have made some curves and say, well, if you look at the compensation and hospitality in the first 10 years, here you are at the bottom of the curve and you're making less than all of your friends who are into, you name it, banking and whatever. Why are you into this business? I'm fortunate to work in an environment that is stunning. And that's a choice that I was able to make. And that is a choice, there's a price, and there's a price for everything. Working in a nice environment brings the level of expectations much higher. But that is a choice that I made and decided to follow very early in my career. I saw one article in the press talking about la guerre des palaces, and I completely disagree with that approach. I think it's fantastic. More competition, the merrier, and the better we are. If you look at certain statistics, you'll see that the occupancy level in five-star properties for the past few years have been steadily growing every single year for five-star properties, so does the average rate. So if there is this overcapacity that journalists love to talk about, at one point, numbers don't lie, right? And at one point, you're going to see that the occupancy is going to go down and the average rate is going to go down. The trend so far has been an extremely positive one, and Paris is a unique destination to sell. I contend that with all the renovations that you mentioned, Paris in the next 3 to 5 years, I don't have a crystal ball, but I contend that Paris will have a unique place in the European market. London has some nice hotels, very nice hotels, but has not seen the level of focus, of financial investment that Paris is experiencing right now. And if Paris becomes the undisputed destination in Europe, then all the better for us.
Do you know why there is no hotel in South America, Egypt, Africa or Middle East?
There's a comfort level that we don't have, and if you mention Africa or if you mention South America, we don't have that level of confidence. Latin America is a market that we've been looking into. We talked about Brazil, we talked about Mexico quite extensively, but remember, our development pace is a very measured one.
I would like to know why is the stake for the Hong Kong and Shanghai group only 20% in the cities of Beverly Hills and Paris?
The Paris, le 19 Avenue Kléber, was originally purchased by an entity called Qatari DR that then sold it internally to another entity called Qatar Hospitality. I'm told, this is a story I have heard, that we tried to bid for the building originally. We lost. They got it. It was a closed bid. They put more money, they got it. The story goes that we, HSH, then approached Qatari DR and said, okay, great, you have the building, what are you going to do with it? And that's where the negotiation came and the desire to acquire equity into the process. Between acquisition and between renovation, we're approximately at 950 million euros. So that's 20% is a lot. And maybe at that point in time, that's the cash that we had. Although if you look at our balance sheet, we still have quite a lot of cash. So I don't think it was a limitation in terms of cash. The 950 million euro probably was a tall order for us at that point in time, probably. And some of us internally regret that we didn't take 100%. But maybe that would have limited our ability to go for London, for example. In some countries, for example, in Thailand or in Burma, you can't, as a foreigner, you cannot own land. So you have to go with the local partners.
Do you have a loyalty program?
Absolutely not. We talked about it. We talked about it. We have a fundamental problem with saying yes and no. We don't officially have one. We unofficially have one. We talked about it. We had a problem with saying we're going to give you a card. It's the fundamental issue of assigning you a number that displeases psychologically. It doesn't do well. It's sort of anticlimactic. All of a sudden you're not Mr. Smith, you're Mr. 00, whatever, 12. And that doesn't go well with a loyalty program. But some people have found ways of hiding the number. So we identified the top 1% of our guests. When I say top 1%, the guests that spend the most with us. From a property management system, we collected data from all of the properties and said, who are your best guests in terms of spend? Individuals. And then we took 1%, approximately 300 guests, and we said, we're going to extend something to you. It's not a loyalty program, but you're going to become a Pen Key member. The idea is to say to you, we're going to give you a device. And that device is going to be a keychain, is going to be a pendant, is going to be whatever you want. It's going to be, in this case, it's a stone, a little stone, that has embedded with it a chip. Whatever peninsula you go to, as soon as you enter the property, you will be recognized as such. So there's no number associated with it. You just carry that little thing on you. You no longer need to check in. You will make your reservation by internet. You will identify yourself. Room will be assigned. You will go to the elevator, and the elevator, because you're carrying your little device and you're tracked, the floor will automatically select. You will arrive in front of the door. The door will automatically open because the little device that you're carrying knows who you are and keeps track of all of your preferences. You have signing privileges, meaning you don't need to show a passport, you don't need to show a credit card, because we already have all of that, all of those details on files. It sounds easy, it sounds wonderful. It's slightly more complex. It requires having some portals around doors so we can, just like your passport when you go through customs, it's the same technology, it's RFID technology. It requires a quite complex level of IT to be able to read the chip and to be able to have this information. The idea is to truly customize it and make it a unique experience which is tailored only for you.
Some of us here are career changers, and what advice could you give to them if we wanted to join the operations of a luxury chain such as yours?
I think a career change in hospitality is an extremely difficult path. We are in an industry, hospitality is an industry that doesn't necessarily recognize highly the value of education. Now, I think that with the experience that one has in another field, you can climb much faster perhaps than others, provided you're willing to pull those sleeves back and demonstrate that you are better than every other colleague in this room, because I'm going to show you what I can do. At one point it was standards. One of my favorite ones, you will answer every phone call within 3 rings, and we would look and monitor. You will use the guest name 3 times within the interaction. And we would have trainers that would go and say, you only said it twice. You only use the guest name twice. You fail. And I think we've moved away from that. If you go from one peninsula in Asia to the US to Europe, you're not going to see the same level of service. If you and I spend more time on a complex check in and you ask me 25 different questions, and if it takes me 5 minutes to conduct a check-in, but I provided satisfaction, I answered every one of your questions, and you leave and you're happy, so what? But we could only say that in a certain size. If I'm in charge of corporate training and I have 75 hotels, I can't say so what. I have to. So once again, my intent is not to limit it to a notion of size, but there is a core size that enables you to have a different type of interaction, for sure. And then how do you measure it? You measure it with guest satisfaction and seeing guests that are happy, guest comments, guest return. More and more, the guests, that's what they want to see. They want to see people who care about their interaction. It sounds so easy to say, but it takes so much to go ahead. And that's what I hope we can move away from standardized to creating emotions. The difficulty with emotions is that emotions can be positive and negative. And you have to acknowledge that with emotions you can never please everyone.
Why did the Peninsula decide to develop a property in Yangon as opposed to continue its expansion overseas in the European market alongside with London?
In the case of Yangon, I'm sorry to lay it that way with you, but I think it's a reality. There's no financial concerted structure. There's no way of saying, oh, in the scope of our development, this would be the ideal. The CSP analysis has determined that this. No, none of the above. We have certain understanding of the country. It's all about life interaction, meeting with a partner. We marvel at the fact that in Paris we have 5.6 meter high ceilings. I'm told that in Yangon it's 7 meter high ceilings. It's something quite extraordinary in terms of colonial building. And the investment is not as consequential as Paris or London. You look at the Peninsula Paris, you look at our restaurant L'Oiseau Blanc. You look at the size that is dedicated to gazing at the Eiffel Tower, and you say to yourself, who's the sick individual who took this place when I could have had a bar, I could have had rooms, I could have had plenty, so I could do so many things that would bring cash. Well, the sick individual has passion and said, I'm not always interested in a return on investment. Now, please don't get me wrong, it's not all only about feelings. We have a chairman that surrounds himself with very astute people, including himself, and somebody's going to go through the numbers, obviously. But Yangon, Rangoon, however, there's no wrong way to spell it, was an opportunity and a belief that this is an emergent market and that it would complement well to have a smaller property within that continent.
How important is mentoring? How important is the network of your bosses or your experience with them?
He was a mentor who gave me the opportunity of recognizing and of saying, I'm going to invest in you. But to say, okay, this person, first of all, chemistry, do I interact well? Secondly, trust. Your question is all about trust at the end. And a little bit of being a little bit astute and looking at who you're dealing with and saying to yourself, can I learn from that person? And is that person willing to invest in me? The same person once said to me about somebody else, the worst thing I can do is lose interest into you. And I thought to myself, that is a very strong warning. If I want to make sure that I don't reach that stage, I want to make sure that I don't disappoint, I want to make sure that when I make mistakes, hey, guess what? I made a mistake again. I'm trying not to do it twice. If I do it 3 times, slap me. And to maintain that dialogue, because if people lose trust and confidence, then they move on.
What is the limits of number of hotels that you can have and still have this very personalized and identified satisfaction to customers?
I don't know. Our goal, if you look in yearly reports, we don't have a development goal. Because we're privately owned, we don't need to justify ourselves and say, we are going to open 5 hotels in the next 5 years. That's not our goal. Our goal is to operate our properties is to provide a return to our shareholders and to make sure that there's a return on the investment, and in a corny way to please our guests, because pleasing our guests enables us to return a value on the investment. Because we can afford to do that. It's quite paradoxical, is that we can afford to not develop because we have the cash to do so. As long as it's family controlled, I think it's possible. It's not always easy, you're absolutely right, of bringing both to the same table. In our case, here you have a Qatari Islamic culture that meets a Iraqi Jewish culture, and it has one common denominator: money. And they get along. The bottom line of this project is long-term driven. And rest assured, Isabelle and I and our Director of Finance are going next week to Doha to defend our budget. I can assure you that bottom line is of the essence. That's why I said earlier to one of your colleagues, I said, you have to realize that the higher the stakes, the higher the expectations. So all of this conversation about feeling good and providing emotions to our guests has to translate into some results. The cost of labor in the US is high, especially in certain markets. If you take our hotel in California, in Beverly Hills, in reality, when you look at the cost of operating that hotel and you look at the cost of Paris, they're quite similar. When you look at the power of unions in both markets, you'd be surprised which is the strongest. In New York, there's no doubt. New York has stronger unions. But compared to our Asian properties, you're absolutely right. The cost of operating a property in Asia is you can't even compare to any kind of ratio that we find in Europe. People sometimes are quite surprised by the sheer number of colleagues saying, well, wait a minute, 200 rooms, 550 people. The statistic that I always take exception to is, well, how many employees per room? I'm like, forget about that. Look at the number of outlets, 3 outlets. Look at a spa. Look at the number of departments that are managed internally. A security team, just to quote, of 33 people. All of that generates a certain mass and comes with a certain cost. And I had to defend that. What we need to do, we have to create a sustainable model. I often say we are not, nous ne sommes pas une œuvre caritative. We're here in the business of making money, for sure.
And the mistakes not to do to have a great career in operation. Sorry.
And in our business, for some reason, we all want to be GMs. I never wanted to be a GM. I never said I wanted to be a GM. That's partially unfair. Over the last few years, yes, of course. But I never walked into an interview and said, I want to be a GM. I always walked in saying, I'll show you what I can do. We're fortunate to work with the Director of Finance, who had a strong background in food and beverage. It helps on a daily basis. And the credibility that he has gained because of his operational background, I notice it on a daily basis. I'm exaggerating. I notice it often. And that, I think, is extremely important, is to say, before specializing yourself in one given area, try to be a generalist. I always took exception in our business because we said, well, are you food and beverage or rooms? Because there are only 2 categories in life. You're food and beverage or rooms. I often say that I used to be a specialist and now I'm a generalist, because now my responsibilities are generalist. Isabelle is still a specialist, and I miss those days of expertise. As I hinted to you, I started in rooms. I used to be at one point a res manager. I had the pulse on the hotel. I could tell you exactly the pickup. I could tell you how many bookings we had. I could tell you how many rooms we'd oversold. I was a specialist. I had to let go of that and move into more of a generalist position.
How do you deal with the competition, and even more, how do you work hand in hand with them?
I regret the absence of working hand in hand, which we don't see too often. Let's be very clear. There is a certain level, and this is Paris. In other markets, it's not. It's different.
The director of marketing of all the luxury Parisian hotels were filmed and recorded on M6. was capital.
Yes.
Okay, and they've been sued, and the
Hmm.
director of finance were all having heart attack because they've been sued on exchanging confidential information. That's where it stopped. But like,
True.
and that was the end of it. And since that date, they are no longer having any meeting with the sales, marketing, and people from the luxury hotels because of that stuff.
I was working in Paris at that time, and that case had
We were
major,
neighbors.
major impact worldwide. 10 years later, in Miami, I was given a training by a high-priced lawyer to explain us the perils of what had happened in France 10 years before. The notion of risk that I do see, and which is an unpopular one and not politically correct, is the notion of being careful to maintain Paris as a #1 destination. And that, when you speak with politicians, and what I'm alluding to is the notion of safety. That, when you start messing with the notion of safety, then you start alienating your guests. Then Paris may no longer be the #1 destination. One of your colleagues was mentioning the affluent Chinese. You mess with them once, twice, 3 times, that's it. You mess with the Japanese guest twice, you're blacklisted. Go speak to the Philippines, who was blacklisted for 5 consecutive years following a tragic incident that was not publicly apologized for. Blacklisted. Government level, meaning that you go, I'm from Hong Kong, I go to the Philippines, I'm not even covered by my embassy, I don't even have insurance. That's what happens when you mess with the notion of safety.
Nicolas, a lot of thank you for being here today.
Please, thank you.